former Providence, Rhode Island Mayor Jorge Elorza, now the CEO of Democrats for Education Reform, which we want to talk a lot about. Elorza served 2 terms as mayor from 2015 to 2023. He's the guy who basically retired the long-term corrupt mayor Buddy Cianci and served 2 popular reformist terms. His is also a compelling personal story. His parents came from Guatemala in the mid-70s, fleeing civil war, and they were undocumented for the first 12 years of his life and only became citizens under President Reagan's amnesty policy. That's back when Republicans weren't xenophobic, right? And then he went out of Harvard and mayor. Welcome, Mayor Elorza.
Hey, it's great to be on here with you all. Mayor Nutter, Mayor Reed, big fan of the work that y'all have done, and great to be on here with you as well, Larry.
Same. We're delighted to have you today.
Hey, we want to get to your current work, but I want to just touch on acknowledging the sheer political talent in this room. We have 3 former mayors on this podcast who all left office with over 60% job approval ratings. It begs the question, why are you all former office holders? What is it about being mayor that lends itself to not seeking public office again when obviously you're still popular?
That for me, Larry?
Yeah, why don't you start?
So a couple thoughts come to mind. So, I mean, I think I speak for Mayor Nutter and Mayor Reed that, if we wanted to be in Congress, we could probably be in Congress. But I think it's our experience as city leaders, as executives, that, it's the approach that we take, the focus on solving problems, on getting stuff done, that direct accountability to the people. We hold ourselves accountable. That turns us away from legislative positions. Not that there's anything wrong with that, with legislative positions, and props to all the people that are leading courageously in legislatures. But we're city executives. It's just a part of who we are. It's our identity. It's the way that we think. And there might be another race in it for each 3 of us. My guess is that if there is, it'd be for an executive position. And truth is, there aren't that many executive positions above being a big city mayor that are out there. So that's just plain reality. So that's one. The second thing that comes to mind, I'll tell you, the transition out of public office, for me at least, was a little difficult. There were like 2 months where I was trying to figure out what my purpose was going to be, and where exactly I would settle in and land. But I'll tell you, I had this experience. I was walking in the park. This is maybe like 6 months after I left office. And, I had started this new job with Democrats for Education Reform. I ran into a woman at the park, and I explained to her what I was doing, right? She was a Spanish speaker. She really didn't understand what I was doing, but she said to me, "You know what, Mayor? I don't know what you're doing, but whatever it is you're doing, I support you because I know it's to benefit all of us." And I tell you, I still sort of get that feeling inside. As mayor, I led with my conscience. I always tried to do what was right. I busted my butt, and I didn't follow wherever the political winds were heading. I always did what was right. And at the end of it all, I think that folks recognize that I was always trying to do what was right for my community. And that's why I left office, a popular mayor. And I would imagine that Mayor Nutter's and Mayor Reed's experience is similar.
Go ahead, Mayor Reed.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about Willie Brown a lot, he was the Speaker of the California Assembly for the longest term in the history of California. You call him right now, ask him what was the best job he ever had, Mayor of San Francisco. Ambassador Andrew Young, another mentor of mine, U.S. Congressman, civil rights leader, Dr. King's right-hand man, UN ambassador, mayor of Atlanta. Call him right now, ask him what's the best job he ever had, mayor of Atlanta. The point I'm making is it's a really terrific job. And so when you think about other jobs after being mayor, the only thing that I think really makes you steeled enough to go through what you have to go through in order to run great campaigns is that job or an executive job. And so I think that legislative jobs for somebody that's had the responsibility for the whole show every day, it's really tough if you're not going to have that feeling again. And the only terrible part of it is I was talking to Mayor Brown, and I asked him one day, when will you get over it? And he laughed at me. He said, never. There's always a part of you. Every time I land in the city, I still look at it as if, as if this is a terrific idea. I would love to do that. I still do it now. And he said it will only dissipate, but it will never go away. So that's my take on it.
My comment is, first, both of you have said everything that I would say. But Mayor Elorza, when you started talking about what the lady was going to say to you, I'll give you a different take on it. I was in the supermarket one day, and a lady came over to me and she said, "Didn't you used to be Michael Nutter?" Yes, ma'am. And I still am. So now there's, both. I know Kasim's history a little better than yours, Mayor Elorza, but I know that he was in the legislature. I was a city council member. I loved it when I was there. Had a great time. But once you do make that transition, and Mayor Reed is absolutely correct. If you talk to Ed Rendell here, if you talk to even, I know some members of Congress who were mayors, they will all tell you, even while they're in the job, the best job they had was mayor. Even some governors will tell you that. It's just, there's something about that job that's different than all the others. And so, yeah, as the mayor said, there are only so many executive jobs. You're gonna be governor of your state, or you'll be president of the United States. I mean, it kind of narrows down your possibilities,
Well, and have either of you thought about running for governor at any time in your respective states?
Hell no. No. It's never been a thought.
You're just not interested in, you're a city guy. Is that what?
Well, A, I'm a city guy. B, it's Harrisburg. I mean, General Assembly, no disrespect to Mayor Reed, he served in the General Assembly. No. Spent enough time in Harrisburg when I was mayor to know that I don't want to be in Harrisburg.
That's great.
I love it.
Well, let's move on to Mayor Elorza's story. And Mayor, can you give us the brief overview of what Democrats for Education Reform is, the work that you're doing, and what the case for that work is?
Yeah, sure, of course. So our organization, we do policy through politics. And really the core of our work is we build relationships with Democratic elected officials and sometimes appointed officials. And we leverage those relationships to shape their views on education policy. And we support them given all the tools that we have in our toolbox so that they can be successful in their education advocacy work. The reality is that as an ed reformer, it's a tough environment in the Democratic Party right now, and it's been that way probably for the past 10 years. Democrats, in all frankness, we haven't led on education since about 2014, sort of those last years of the Obama presidency, when the Common Core issues really came up. So it's been 10 years. Many electeds that were leading on education before that, they've left office. They haven't been replaced. And so what has happened with Democrats is that, frankly, over time, we've lost the language, the ideas, the policies, and the vision on education. And, you know, particularly after COVID, it started to cost us politically. So 10 years ago, we used to have a 26-point advantage over Republicans on voter trust on education. Today, that advantage is completely gone. And in fact, in
Wow.
battleground states, we're underwater. We're -3. Like, we are no longer the party of education, and it's hurting us politically. And so in the spirit of never letting a good crisis go to waste, you know, I see an opportunity here. You know, we're no longer armed with only the policy case or the moral case. Now it's also the political self-interest case. And so we talk to the administration, we talk to leaders in Congress, we talk to leaders at the state level, and, you know, we're getting folks' attention. And we want to be there to help build up that language, the ideas, the policy, and the vision on education, and support courageous leaders who are leading boldly on education. And that's what we do.
Where do you think you're making the greatest progress right now, man?
You know, I think that
Where are you seeing movement?
I think the space with the greatest opportunity is at the governor level. Again, at the executive level. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has not been strong on ed reform. They have been supportive of education issues, but not necessarily reforms. But there's a crop of governors and gubernatorial candidates that are interested in leading on education. So, you know, the big names are Governor Polis, of course, in Colorado, Governor Moore, that's very interested in leading on education. He comes from a reform background, and Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania as well. You know, I have a lot of interest, and you know, I'm watching keenly what each of them do. But then there are also some gubernatorial candidates that are popping up across the country that are reaching out to us and saying, we want to lead on education. What do you recommend? What should we do? So I think there's a lot of energy at the gubernatorial level.
Yeah. Well, you know, but I would also say, especially in more recent times, I mean, again, as Democrats, just happens to be the three of us, we've not paid as much attention at the state level, which really is the focal point in many instances of education. This is where, you know, House and Senate seats, redistricting, and education funding come into play, and the school boards, right? So the Republicans have spent a lot of time focused on running for every possible office, but especially focused on elected school boards. And so now we've got, you know, in a state recently, we've got to put up the 10 commandments in every classroom. We're banning books and a variety of other things. This is all a part of the larger culture war that Republicans are focused on, in my view, in particular with education.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
well, I was just going to ask you if you could respond to that, but also for our audience, define education reform. Are we talking just about public charters? What are the other touchstones of the agenda?
yeah, sure. So on the culture wars, you know, this all really took off during COVID, and then with the Governor Glenn Youngkin election in Virginia. You know, the Republicans saw that they were onto something when it comes to parents' rights and, you know, parent choice. And so just in the past 3 years, there's about 14 or 15 states that have passed significant and comprehensive private school choice laws. So, you know, there's, you know, the culture wars gets all sort of the attention in the media, but substantively, Republicans have been on a tear throughout the country at pitching their vision of private school choice. And, you know, it's this thing that, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day. They're on to something. You know, choice resonates with voters, because of course it does, right? Especially low-income Black and brown folks who have never had, you know, any meaningful or good education choices. If you offer them a voucher, you offer them an ESA, they start thinking, well, this is better than what I have right now. And so, whereas Republicans have this vision of private school choice, on the Democratic side, we're still fighting this debate of choice versus no choice, we're not even in the choice conversation. And so, you know, you ask Larry, what is ed reform more generally, and what is our agenda? So this is how I would answer that. So when I think of the challenges in education, I think the fundamental challenge in education, it's a design challenge, right? We have to take a systems approach. Now, if you're designing a system that's designed to continually improve or evolve to create better results, you need three elements. You need innovation, accountability, and choice. You need innovation so you can figure out what works. You need accountability so that you're only investing in what works. And you need choice so that families can decide for themselves what works. Because at the end of the day, families will always have the best interests of their kids in mind. But when you look at the education landscape, there is very little education. There is very little innovation in education, or at least a lot less than there needs to be. There is virtually no accountability for performance. We simply refund each year what we funded the previous year. And as you know, there's very little choice. So it's not just about choice. It's not just about charter schools. It's about much more than that. But that's a framework that we offer to folks who want to lead on this issue. You know, sometimes people tell me, the more I learn about education, the less I feel I know. And policymakers don't know exactly where to begin. And we offer that framework. Just think about, you know, how do we incentivize education? How do we remove barriers to innovation? How do we build data systems for accountability? How do we only fund what's working? And how do we expand choice and put power into the hands of families?
Mayor Loza, give us some insight into how you decided that this was the space that you were going to focus your efforts after 2 successful terms. I want to walk through the process that you went through, what opportunities you looked at, and how you got to the decision of where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. If I could step back a couple of steps. So as Larry mentioned, I'm the son of immigrants. My mother has a 4th grade education, my dad a 3rd grade education. They came to this country with nothing but hopes and dreams. And even though they didn't have a formal education, they knew that an education was a ticket to a better life. So since I can remember, it's been education, education, education. And I'd love to be able to tell you that I was that kid that always listened to mom and did the right thing. But, you know, I was a dunce in high school. I had to get my act together afterwards. I started off at community college, etc. And once I got serious about education, that's when my life changed. So education did that for me. And I want to make sure that other kids have that same opportunity. So I ran for mayor because I wanted to transform our public schools. And then as mayor, I'll tell you, I received an education on the politics of education. I learned a great deal about the policy and the politics of it. And, you know, having left office, I feel as though I have unfinished business. I learned a great deal about the politics, and I want to, you know, impart some of that wisdom and share it with other elected officials. And I learned a lot about the policy, and I'm still learning about the policy, you know, particularly in a moment, as I mentioned, that Democrats have lost the language, the ideas, the policies, and the vision, and that muscle needs to be rebuilt. And I think I can help contribute to rebuilding that muscle within the party. So I'll tell you, I continue to consider myself the luckiest man alive. I get to apply the skills that I've honed over the past 10 years of my life to a cause that I truly and deeply care about. And that's what brings me to this work.
So in Providence, did you all have mayoral control of the school system, or did you have a bully pulpit approach?
No, I control the schools.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I control the schools in Providence. Yeah.
And what were the great challenges in that in that governance structure? Successes and challenges, Mayor, that you found while you were in office and in charge of schools directly?
Yeah. Well, let me modify that. So I controlled the schools, control within quotation marks. So while, you know, the schools fell under me, the reality was that, you know, I had very little power to affect meaningful change over the schools. And that's part of the issue in education. It's not dissimilar from other places. Who's in charge? Is it the school board? Is it the city council? Is it the mayor? Is it the state board? Is it the governor? no one is held directly accountable for education outcomes. And so it makes it so that if you're a political leader and you don't want to lead on education, you don't necessarily have to lead on education. But of course, I was a mayor and I wanted to tackle all of the big challenges. And so I dove into leading on education. And while I did have some authority, the reality is that, it's a combination of a number of things. There's institutional inertia. There's a culture of compliance, but there are also legal impediments or legal barriers to change that all preserve the status quo. And so, I worked to try to break each one of those down, but it was really difficult and in some cases impossible. So I took the step, working with Governor Gina Raimondo at the time, to bring the state in to help transform the schools in the way of reforming the contract. We had a very restrictive contract. On top of that, we had very restrictive teacher tenure laws. On top of that, we had very restrictive state arbitration laws. It's sort of, you peel back the layers of the onion and you see all of the barriers, all of the structural barriers that are in place that serve to protect the status quo. And taking it on is very difficult. But again, that's where I mentioned I learned a lot of really valuable lessons, both on the policy and the politics side. And that's part of my job right now, taking that to other elected officials to make sure that they can be more effective in their advocacy.
So to be clear, I think I read that you twice were opposed by the teachers union. Bringing the state in was a pretty radical thing to do in the face of that opposition. How did it work out?
Yeah, so that was indeed the nuclear option. And I did that after I had a long standoff with the teachers union on contract negotiations. And I realized that just legally, you're not able to get you're not able to transform the school districts through the normal processes. And so that's what led to, those conversations with Governor Raimondo. And the way that those conversations went down. So we sat down and we spoke about education, and she suggested that the state come in and take over 3 middle schools, because middle school was a particular pain point. And I told her, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I was only interested in doing it if we did the whole shebang. So she was up for it. We worked through the details. When we announced it, everyone was against it. City council against it, school board was against it. We had to work, I had to do a lot of work to get them all to embrace it, to finally approve it. And so we went down that road. Politics has intervened in the middle. So we have a new governor here in Rhode Island who took a different approach. But even as we sit here and record this interview, the education system and the reforms, they're still being played out here in the city. So it's an ongoing challenge and an open question. But I'll tell you, one thing is for sure, that we've raised awareness of the challenges in our public school system. And in my opinion, I think that we've heightened the political interest that there is writ large in seeing significant reforms to what we're doing. I've shared very publicly, if you can believe, only 2.4% of seniors in Providence that go to traditional schools can do math at grade level. Like 2.4%. It's just outrageous. Like, how do we allow this? We should be marching. This is indefensible. And, so that's Providence. Cities like Baltimore are probably worse. Chicago, probably worse. The Deep South, probably worse. So now in this new role, I want to call out the fact that there's an education crisis throughout the country that's outrageous. And what I find equally outrageous is that there seems to be no urgency to do anything about it. With the way that education has now become a political liability for Democrats. We're starting to get the attention of folks, and hopefully we'll see some more attention with the right level of urgency to address these challenges.
Yeah, I would just add that here in Philadelphia, it's 28% of third graders are reading at grade level. And as you know, if you're not reading at grade level by fourth grade, your future is kind of set. And my wife's a third grade public school teacher, and the school year just ended. She got, I think it was 14 of 15 kids were not reading at grade level at the beginning of the year. All were by the end of the year, which is awesome. And a shout out to her, Betty Mizgala. But she will be the first to tell you what you just said is exactly right. That is a temporary fix for those kids just to get them to par. And there's this thing called the summer slide, which over 3 months in the summer, kids aren't reading, they're back. They regress by the start of the school year. So I'm with you on the lack of urgency. Go ahead, guys. Your thoughts, mayors.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, in addition to the summer slide, I mean, the kids are already in many instances behind from COVID. I mean, they weren't in school for a year and a half, basically. I mean, they were in front of a computer screen, those who had, internet and a computer, but that was certainly no substitute. And so if you're already behind in a race, you're further behind. Somehow the responsibilities of the mayor, and the state had already, as you well know, Larry, the state took over public education in 2001. We were still under the SRC when I was in office. But my whole approach was, I'm responsible for picking up the trash of these children's parents. I'm going to have something to say about the quality of education they get. And so, you just work within the structure that you have. You deal with the cards that you're dealt. And I just felt it was our responsibility to make sure that we made some improvements. We weren't perfect, but I mean, more kids graduated from high school than before I got there. More went to college and graduated as well. It's your economic base, and it's the foundation of anything else that you're going to do going forward. And so, in the citizens at a certain level, I mean, they're not into the who's in charge of what. You're the mayor. You must be responsible for it. The Board of Education, the school district building, was 6 blocks from City Hall. The governor actually was in charge, ultimately, of education, but that's up in Harrisburg, 90 miles away. It's a whole lot easier to come protest at City Hall than it is at the state capitol. And so you just take responsibility for these things. These are our kids. Who else is going to be responsible for them? And so that was basically, our approach. But I mean, I had many more people complaining about, on-time trash pickup in some instances than whether kids were reading at third grade. It's a bizarre situation in some instances because there is a lot of finger pointing. There are a lot of different constituencies. Many people seem to have a role, but ultimately somebody has to be in charge.
Mayor Reed, what was your situation with the schools?
So in Atlanta, the school system is separate. So the mayor's influence is more of a bully pulpit influence. And so we had just emerged from probably the worst cheating test-taking scandal in the United States. And I acted, to recruit a best-in-class superintendent, and then use political influence to change members of the board to pass reform in Atlanta. And we improved our statistics and data drastically. I made a political choice when I was in office that I was going to do pension reform first. So I prioritized pensions over taking control of the school system because I felt that if the city of Atlanta went bankrupt, then nothing else was ever going to work. So I spent my political capital on pensions.
I remember that cheating scandal. And
Mhm.
it raised the question of and I'll ask Mayor Elorza about this, did the reforms of the Obama era inadvertently create things like Atlanta's cheating scandal because of the emphasis on testing?
Well, we went out. I don't know if they created them, but I think that, it caused us to recruit a different level of individual to be involved in the education of our kids. We got the Chancellor of Higher Education for the state of Georgia, would became the superintendent of Atlanta Public School System. And so it caused a focus and an intensity, the likes of which I see in the mayor's reforms. So he embodies it. And so I'm excited to see that he continues to have the same kind of fervor and passion.
What are the takeaways, pithy takeaways on education that can resonate with voters besides just, concepts like reform?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've thought about this, Larry, and I think that, I've always believed that there's no such thing as the ideal strategy or the ideal approach in the abstract. There's only the best approach or the best strategy for a given environment. So we have to understand the environment in which we're operating. And the truth is that, the mood of the moment is one of great angst. What Donald Trump has always done so well, like most, quote unquote, successful dictators, is that he taps into a deep sense of grievance. What I would advise President Biden is to also tap into a deep sense of grievance, but do it in a way that doesn't divide us, but actually brings us together. And I think there's an opportunity in education. So I mentioned the statistics in Providence. Do you all know, or rather, can you believe that there are 23 entire schools in Baltimore, Maryland, where not one single child in those schools can do math at grade level? That's outrageous. It's indefensible. And, I think there's an opportunity here to just call out the injustice, call out, show the outrage, be indignant. And I think that would tap into, deep anxieties that we feel in our community. And we can channel, that anxiety and that anger into something positive for real reforms for kids. And then we can get into a policy discussion.
I'd also say a sense of urgency, coupled with the being outraged, and the anxiety is the, as Dr. King would always talk about, the urgency of now. Urgency of now as it relates to education.
That's a great point. And I love Mayor Elorza when you talked about accountability, because I've done a lot of internet searches. I've looked to see, when has a school superintendent been fired for not educating kids? And all I can find is school superintendent fired for either a sex scandal or a financial scandal, but not held accountable when entire schools aren't at grade level. And your point is that there's a political price to pay for not paying attention to that.
Yeah. And, I think there's something to be said about tough love. What I would like to see is this combination of being tough because I care. And, that shows up in accountability. Yes, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to hold you to high standards, and we're going to hold you accountable to those high standards. And we're doing this because we really care about our kids. We really care about our communities. And that's the kind of culture that we want to create. And so when it comes to accountability, in our organization, we believe in two things. First is we need to build up data systems, like how we collect data, but also how we use it for data-driven decision-making. That seems pretty basic, But the truth is that there's a lot of work to be done to have those systems in place. That's one. And then the second is this radical idea, or really what would be a radical idea. And that is that we should invest more in the things that work and invest less in the things that don't work. That would be a radical idea in education. But I'll tell you, it's one that's just common sense to the average voter. And if, there was this posture of, yes, we're going to be tough, but we're going to be tough because we care. I think that would resonate deeply with a lot of voters, especially low-income Black and brown voters who are just really frustrated with their public school options.
Yeah, that's
Mayor, I'm listening to things you walk through, and love to get Mayor Reed's perspective on this. I think there would be no other department or agency in any government. I think about the streets department, I think about the water department, I think about parks and recreation, where if they had a on-time performance of 30%, the calls for the mayor to find somebody else to run that agency would be deafening. On-time trash pickup, how much water in the swimming pools, do we have, gym equipment, parks and recreation, we're only cutting the grass 25% of the time. I mean, any other part of the government with that level of performance or underperformance, the citizens would lose their minds. But yet somehow in education, you don't get that same sustained level of outrage.
Well put.
Interesting.
Yeah, great point.
Hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
well. Go ahead, Mayor Elorza.
I was going to say that's so part of the challenge is that the political incentives don't align in education, because it's sort of this divided responsibility. Like, really, who's in charge? I believe there's only about 11 or 12 cities in the country where the mayor has direct control over the schools. But as I mentioned, even where I had control of schools, I really didn't. And so who do you hold accountable? School board, city council, the mayor, the governor, the Department of Education. No one is really in charge, meaning no one is held accountable, meaning no one dives in to take, to expend political capital to tackle the thorniest issues. And so it's a systems problem. It's a design challenge that we have if we really want to turn around education.
Well, guys, this has been really great, Mayor Elorza. I mean, I got to say, I think that guys, we're talking to the next Secretary of Education in a Biden administration. But he's shaking his head because that
He shook his head quickly.
Yeah,
He shook his head quickly.
That's
Only
back to
because
us.
there is 0% chance that will happen.
Well, it's also goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is it's not necessarily a CEO role that comports with your experience of being a mayor. But there's a vast amount of knowledge there, and what I really like is your passion for this and your sense of urgency. So I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank
It's
you
been
so
a
much.
pleasure. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure being here. Always great to spend some time with other mayors. And thank you for providing this platform to help get the message out.
Absolutely. Good seeing you, man.
Look forward to crossing paths in Providence.
Same here,
Absolutely.
gentlemen. I look forward to being in touch.
All righty.
Thank you, Mayor.
Take care.
That's it for this episode of How to Really Run a City. If you like what you're listening to, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends about us. We really want to widen the conversation because, again, I keep reminding people of this. By 2050, something like 2/3 of the world will live in cities. As cities go, so goes the nation, and so goes the world. For now, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.